Over the past few years, Supreme hasn't been in the spotlight as much as it once was. The brand still drops new products and does collabs that get attention, but they don't seem to create the same level of hype and excitement as they once did. That made me wonder, is Supreme washed? Or am I just not as plugged into streetwear and fashion as I once was? But after looking online, I realized that I wasn't the only one thinking this. Some fans of the brand and people following fashion felt similarly. That made me want to dig deeper and find out exactly why that was. After some research, I was able to learn why people's view of the brand might have changed, but I also realized just how much Supreme had helped shape marketing and sales tactics that streetwear and even the fashion industry as a whole still use till this day. I got especially interested in how the founder James Jebbia was able to grow Supreme into such a powerful brand. So powerful that in 2017, he was able to sell 50% of the company for about $500 million. Then 3 years later in 2020, was able to sell the company as a whole for $2.1 billion, cashing out as a billionaire. Just super quick, this video has no sponsors, so it would mean the world to me if you liked the video, maybe drop a comment and subscribe for similar content in the future. Now back to the video. Supreme reached its peak in cultural relevance around 2016 to 2018, and naturally after a peak comes a decline. This decline seemed to have began soon after James Jebbia sold half of the company in 2017 to a private equity firm called the Carlyle Group. We'll talk later about how taking institutional money changed the brand and how it might have changed people's perception of it. But first, I want to break down how James Jebbia built Supreme to its peak while it was still under his ownership. Because to get a $500 million check for half of your company, you have to do a lot of things right. James Jebbia was born in the US but grew up in the UK. However, in 1983, at 19 years old, he moved from the UK to New York City. He was already in tune with European skate culture and fashion, so shortly after arriving, he was able to land a job at a clothing store called Parachute in a part of New York City known as Soho in Lower Manhattan. This was a fashion-forward boutique where he got his start in retail and learned the day-to-day basics of running a store, from working the floor to buying and merchandising. While working at this store, he also met and became friends with a man named Eddie Cruz, who later launched the clothing brand Undefeated. Parachute eventually closed its doors in the late 1980s, but shortly after, in 1989, James Jebbia and a woman named Marianne Fusco founded Union NYC. It was a mixed high fashion and street-driven boutique that focused on limited hard-to-find labels from the UK, Japan, the US, and other emerging street brands. Here, he learned more about taste curation, selective scarcity, and high-to-low fashion blending. James Jebbia eventually brought the clothing brand Stussy as one of the labels that sold at Union, and once Stussy started selling there, it quickly became one of the store's most in-demand labels. That success led Sean Stussy, the founder of Stussy, to open up the first Stussy store in New York City. Sean brought James Jebbia in as store manager, and there he was able to see firsthand how a subculture label could expand globally while still feeling authentic. There, he deepened his understanding of the growing streetwear ecosystem, brand scaling, and the power of a clear brand identity. James Jebbia's time at Stussy was the most important stage of his career. In many ways, he was serving as an apprentice under Sean Stussy. Then, in 1994, James Jebbia went solo and launched a Supreme store on Lafayette Street in New York City. By this point, he had plenty of knowledge to work with. When opening the store, Supreme made the experience the advertisement. They ran no ads, didn't get celebrity endorsements, and they didn't have a press tour. The store was the ad. Instead of clothing racks filling the store, the floor was left open so skaters could ride straight through. The clothes were pushed to the walls and they played a curated list of tracks that you'd hear from real New York skaters and downtown locals, not the radio. The message was clear. This wasn't just a place to shop, it was a place to hang out. James Jebbia staffed the store with real New York skaters, artists, and underground creatives who embodied the image Supreme would be known for. Early employees included skateboarders like Justin Pierce and Harold Hunter, both of whom appeared in Larry Clark's 1995 film, Kids, which captured the downtown youth culture. Supreme became known for hiring people who were already part of the scene and letting their style shape the brand, not the other way around. This wasn't accidental. Supreme didn't try to be liked by everyone. It tried to be respected by a few, and that exclusivity became the brand's attraction. At first, the Supreme store sold other skateboard brands like Zoo York, Spitfire, and Shorties. Supreme's own label was just a small part of the shop, but as they released more of their own tees, sweatshirts, and hoodies, demand grew, and the focus slowly shifted towards Supreme's in-house products. Then, around 1996, Supreme introduced the box logo, a simple red rectangle with white text. It wasn't colorful or detailed, but it was bold and impossible to ignore. The design was directly inspired by the work of artist Barbara Kruger, who used similar visuals to challenge ideas around power, consumerism, and authority. That inspiration quickly became controversial. Many people pointed out how closely the logo mirrored Kruger's style, and Kruger herself criticized Supreme, calling the use of her visual language uncool. Critics also pointed out the irony of a clothing brand borrowing from an artist who openly spoke out against consumerism. But the controversy didn't slow Supreme down. By that point, the brand was already deeply tied to New York skate and street culture. To consumers, the box logo became a signal of awareness, knowing the culture, the references, and what it represented. Supreme had turned the logo into a cultural signal. As demand grew, Supreme made a radical choice. They refused to scale supply. They didn't wholesale or supply department stores, no restocks, and only had a few physical locations. This wasn't a production problem, it was a strategy. The Lafayette store was their only location until 1998, which was the year they opened a store in Japan, and it stayed the only US location until 2004 when they opened a store in Los Angeles. Today, even as a billion-dollar company, they only have 6 stores in the US and 12 international stores. James Jebbia understood something early on. Scarcity doesn't just increase demand, it also creates excitement and a die-hard following. In the beginning, Supreme didn't collaborate often, and when they did, it was with brands that already had a good rep with their customers, like Nike, Vans, The North Face, and respected iconic figures. Partnerships that reinforced authenticity rather than hype. These collaborations were trust signals used to grow the brand stronger. Over time, some of the collabs and accessories that Supreme has dropped have been strange, starting with the Everlast boxing gloves and then followed by everything else. These why does it exist items really clicked into place with the crowbar in 2015 and the brick in 2016. That's when the wider internet realized that Supreme could slap a box logo on anything and it would sell out. This massively reinforced social proof and helped them consistently make headlines. Talking about headlines, around 2010 is when Supreme formalized its weekly drop model. Every Thursday at the same time, a small number of items would be released with no restocks, eventually causing a weekly spectacle outside of their stores, contributing to their exclusive, highly sought-after image. What started as a sales tactic ended up changing fashion. Buying Supreme became a ritual, a competition to get limited run items, and a public event. Throughout their come-ups, Supreme stuck to its guns and continued to avoid formally marketing the brand. They continued to not run ads, give interviews, or explain their collections. Instead, something more powerful happened. Lines continued to form outside the stores weekly, photos spread across online forums, and people talked. Supreme let public behavior do the marketing. The line became the billboard, and the sellout became the press release. Supreme mastered the art of earned attention as marketing for their brand long before social media was widely adopted. As demand for Supreme grew while inventory stayed extremely limited, resale markets began to explode and Supreme didn't try to stop resellers. They ignored them. That silence became another genius marketing move. At some point, James Jebbia said that Supreme produced limited quantities to avoid unsold inventory, which makes sense because that's often how premium brands end up in discount stores like Ross or Marshall's, which is awesome for people like me that like to save money, but not so much for the brands that want to uphold an exclusive premium image. However, it was very clear that the level to which they underproduced was intentional and added fuel to resale demand and the hype. High resale prices send a powerful message. Supreme holds its value. The products were no longer just seen as clothing, they were also perceived as assets. The secondary market turned into more public proof of demand, visible to anyone paying attention. By doing nothing, Supreme let the resale market further validate the brand. All of this led to their peak, which many say was the 2017 Louis Vuitton collab. In January of 2017, Supreme collaborated with LV, bringing together a New York skate brand and one of the world's biggest luxury houses. Supreme had worked with luxury brands before like CDG and other high fashion names, but this collaboration was on a completely different level. What made it even more interesting was that back in the year 2000, Louis Vuitton had gone after Supreme legally, sending a cease and desist letter after Supreme used an LV-style monogram on some of its clothing and skateboards. So the 2017 collab felt like a full-circle reversal of that situation. This collaboration wasn't Supreme going mainstream because it already was. It was luxury admitting that culture had shifted. Supreme didn't ask for legitimacy. It delivered relevance. At that moment, the message was clear. Streetwear didn't need fashion's approval. Fashion needed streetwear to stay relevant. Just months after the Louis Vuitton collab, it was announced that James Jebbia sold 50% of Supreme to the Carlyle Group for roughly $500 million, putting $1 billion valuation on the company. On the surface, nothing seemed to have changed after the sale. Drops still sold out, the stores felt the same, and James Jebbia said the brand would remain under his creative control. But behind the scenes, the incentive structure did shift. Private equity doesn't invest in culture for culture's sake. It invests in predictable growth, revenue, and exit value. Even if fans didn't feel it right away, Supreme wasn't just a brand anymore. It was an asset with investors that had expectations. Then in 2020, VF Corporation, which owns many brands including Vans and The North Face, purchased Supreme for $2.1 billion. This deal became a real turning point for public perception. After VF Corporation bought Supreme, a lot of people started looking at the brand differently. Even though VF talked about staying hands-off, fans could now see the public company mindset behind a label that built its name on feeling independent and underground. I personally remember seeing a huge Supreme billboard in 2020, and I was shocked to see it because it wasn't something that Supreme was known for. I'm not gonna lie, it was kinda cool to see it, but I remember wondering if I would now see Supreme stores in every mall. Supreme's basic playbook has stayed in place. Weekly drops, tight control over distribution, and a business that leans heavily on direct-to-consumer sales. But over time, some fans have felt that scarcity looks less like a natural byproduct of the culture, and more like a system being managed for growth. More product, more repetition, and less of the weird, risky energy that used to make drops feel unpredictable. The machine still works, but the hype has weakened. In 2024, Supreme was sold again. The VF Corporation sold it to Axiller Luxottica for $1.5 billion. That's about $600 million lower than what they bought it for. But the lower sale price doesn't necessarily mean that Supreme failed. It suggested that most of the hypergrowth or upside had already been captured, and the brand was now moving into a steadier phase. With Axiller Luxottica, the upside becomes expanding over time, entering new categories, and reaching more markets without losing or significantly changing the core identity of the brand. It's what happens when a culture leader becomes a legacy brand. But in streetwear, mature can look like washed, because the scene is always chasing the next new and exciting thing. During VF Corporation's final 3 years of ownership, Supreme consistently generated over $500 million in annual revenue. About $561 million in 2022, $523 million in 2023, and roughly $538 million in 2024. So by that metric, they haven't really fallen off. My final thoughts are that James Jebbia is a great businessman. Because if we look at what he did, in 2017, he sold half of his company to the private equity group for $500 million. And private equity groups are in the business of making money. So they came in and helped them change a few things here and there to later sell the whole company to the VF Corporation for $2.1 billion. That means that James Jebbia ended up cashing out as a billionaire. Now, is the brand washed because of it? Is it ruined? Well, I don't think so, because they successfully became a legacy brand, and there's many other legacy brands in fashion that continue to be relevant, such as Nike, Louis Vuitton, Levi's, etc. And it's normal in fashion for brands to get red hot like Supreme was in 2017 and then cool off. I think that as long as they don't overproduce and we don't start seeing Supreme at Ross or JCPenney, the brand should be alright. That's how fashion cycles and tastes work after all. Once a brand or style spreads widely, it becomes a bit less exciting. I'm interested to know what your personal opinion of Supreme is. Are they done? Are they better? Will they bounce back? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed watching this video and or learned anything from it, please give it a like and consider subscribing for more similar content in the future. Thanks for watching.